No one noticed the boy, sitting on the edge of the crowded sidewalk, except when their expensive shoes needed to shine. His age couldn't have been more than 12. Thin arms, dusty clothes, eyes far older than his years, holding a small wooden shoe polish box that had seen more life than most people walking past him. Every morning before sunrise, he sat at the same spot outside a massive glass building where billion-dollar deals were discussed inside air-conditioned rooms. People in suits passed him daily, talking on phones worth more than his entire life, laughing, arguing, planning projects worth hundreds of crores. But to them he was invisible, just another poor child polishing shoes. His name was Arav, and his classroom was the street. His teacher was hunger, and his exams were survival. His father had died years ago at a construction site accident no company ever took responsibility for. His mother worked as a cleaner and still couldn't afford school fees. So Arav learned numbers by counting footsteps, learned business by watching faces, and learned human nature by silence. Because when you have nothing, you listen more than you speak. And Arav listened carefully every single day, especially to the men in suits who sat on the bench near him, polishing their shoes while discussing something that sounded enormous, something called Project Zenith, a project so big that even the word carried weight. They talked about deadlines, losses, investors panicking, technical failures, government pressure. One mistake and the company would collapse. One solution and they would become legends. And every time they stood up and walked away, Arav wiped the bench clean like he wiped their shoes, never interrupting, never asking questions, just absorbing everything like a sponge. Because poor children don't have the luxury of curiosity, only necessity. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Project Zenith became the most repeated phrase in those conversations. It was a 100 crore infrastructure project meant to change an entire city, but it was failing badly. Sensors weren't syncing, logistics routes were collapsing, timelines were impossible, and every executive who passed Arav's bench looked more stressed than the last. Until one evening when rain poured down unexpectedly, Arav stayed under the building's shade while most people ran. A black luxury car stopped suddenly. A man stepped out furious, phone in hand, shouting at someone on the other end. He kicked a puddle in frustration, splashing muddy water all over his polished Italian shoes. He looked down in disgust. That was the first time he looked at Arav. Not through him, but at him. "Clean it," the man said harshly, tossing the shoe forward. Arav nodded silently and began working. Carefully, patiently, like always. The man continued ranting on the phone about how the entire project was collapsing because data from ground level doesn't match what's planned at the top. Those words hit Arav like lightning. His hands froze for a second, because he had heard this exact problem discussed dozens of times. He had watched delivery trucks stuck daily because of wrong route planning. He had seen construction material arriving late because roads were blocked. He had seen workers idle because machines arrived before foundations were ready, all because people sitting in offices never saw the ground reality. Arav swallowed hard, fear battling courage inside him. Poor children are taught one thing early: don't speak unless spoken to. But something inside him refused to stay silent today. Softly, almost trembling, he said, "Sir, the problem isn't the system. It's the order." The man stopped talking mid-sentence, turned slowly, anger flashing in his eyes. "What did you say?" Arav's heart pounded so loud he thought the man could hear it. But he continued, words pouring out faster than fear. "You are sending things in the wrong sequence. Machines before roads, materials before storage, workers before planning. Everything arrives, but at the wrong time." There was silence, rain hitting the pavement, city noise fading. The man stared at the boy as if seeing him for the first time, not as a shoeshine boy, but as a voice he had never heard inside boardrooms. "How do you know this?" the man asked quietly. Arav pointed to the street. "I sit here every day. I see trucks blocked, workers waiting, supervisors arguing. The city tells the truth, sir, not the files." Something shifted in the man's expression, curiosity replacing anger. He asked Arav to explain more. And for the next 15 minutes, while rain poured and the world rushed past them, a boy with no education explained logistics flow, real-time sequencing, and ground-level optimization using nothing but observation and logic. When Arav finished, the man's hands were shaking, not from cold but realization, because the boy had just summarized in minutes what his top consultants failed to solve in months. The man stood up slowly, handed Arav a card worth more than his shoebox, and said words that would change everything. Come to my office tomorrow, not to polish shoes, but to talk. Arav held the card like it was fragile glass. That night he couldn't sleep, not because of hunger, but because for the first time, the future knocked on his door, and little did he know, this conversation on a rainy sidewalk was about to save a 100 crore project and expose a truth the world refuses to accept. Genius doesn't need degrees, it needs opportunity. And if you think intelligence only lives inside offices, this story is about to prove you wrong. So before this chapter ends, remember this. If a boy no one noticed could change the fate of a billion-rupee project, imagine what hidden potential exists around us. And if stories like this move you, inspire you, and open your eyes, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will completely change Arav's life and the destiny of Project Zenith. The next morning, Arav stood outside a building he had only ever seen from the sidewalk, its glass walls reflecting a world he believed was never meant for him. Security guards eyed him suspiciously, his clothes still simple, his shoes still worn, the same shoe-polish boy now holding a visiting card that felt heavier than his entire life. When he finally entered the elevator, his heart raced, faster with every floor it climbed, because with each number rising, the distance between his old life and whatever awaited him grew wider. Inside the boardroom, the air was tense. Men and women in expensive suits sat around a massive table covered with digital screens, charts glowing red, numbers screaming losses, deadlines blinking like warnings. This was the Project Zenith war room, the same project that had already burned millions. When the CEO walked in with Arav beside him, conversation stopped instantly. Eyes widened. Confusion turned into disbelief. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" Another muttered, "Why is a child here?" Embarrassment flashed across faces. Anger followed, but the CEO raised his hand, silencing them all. "This boy knows more about our ground reality than all of us combined," he said calmly. Shock rippled through the room. Arav stood quietly, palms sweating, fighting the urge to run. Then the CEO turned to him and said words that echoed in his ears. "Explain to them what you explained to me." The room felt like a courtroom, judgment heavy in the air. Arav swallowed and began slowly at first, then with growing confidence. He spoke about timing mismatches, about trucks arriving before storage was ready, about workers idle because machines came early, about roads blocked because planners never stood on them,